Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku became the storm part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story HalfQuetzalcoatlHunter from fanfiction. So let's start the video. 1. 𝗏𝗏. It waited. For thousands of years, it waited for the right host to appear before it. It had been passed around as a trinket, as a toy, as garbage from a bygone era. For so long it had moved from place to place, either in the pocket of a thief or by hiding itself. Now, having waited for so long, it was barely able to remember why it was that it was waiting. The mission. It reminded itself, I must never forget the mission. Its mission, however, was long forgotten. It no longer knew what its mission was. All that it wanted now was a host that would blink. Someone had stepped on it. "What's this?" said a youthful voice as it felt thin fingers wrapping around it. Did a hero drop this, or... At last, two small red eyes opened, startling the holder of the object as sharp legs carried it up his arm, under his sleeve, and up to his shoulders as the youth yelped in fright while he was trying to dislodge it. But it had waited for too long for a host. Anyone would do now. It settled just below his would-be host's neck and clamped down with its jaws. The host screamed from the bite, but cried out even louder as it began to integrate itself into his system. It knew that this was a painful process, as it needed to dig itself down into his spinal cord and central nervous system. Injecting its nanomachines into the host's body would repair any damage to it. It knew this. But the way the host now writhed and screamed as it took hold of him, as it finished becoming one with its host, it saw into his mind. It knew that the world in which it inhabited was filled with beings of immense power, and it found that its new host wished to be one of those beings. However, this host had no special powers that others of its kind did. It would forever be a powerless creature in the face of these titans that called themselves heroes and villains. I can make this possible, it thought as it began to spread itself over the host's body. Beetle. Izuku Midoriya had been having a rotten day. It hadn't started out as bad as it had become. He had been early to leave, and was well on his way to making it to school on time. But there had been a villain attack, one involving a villain with a gigantification quirk, the hero 𝗧𝗵𝗲, and the debut of 𝐭𝐴 Woods and Mount Lady, a female hero that also had a gigantification quirk, and that was where his good morning had turned rotten. Because of the villain attack and his habit of taking notes on any new quirks he happened to see, he had been late to class, which made the homeroom teacher lecture him in front of the class while the other students just laughed and ridiculed him from behind the man's back. Then, later in the day, his teacher had let slip of his intentions to attend UA High School, and his childhood friend/bully, Katsuki Bakugo, had not been happy about it. To explain a bit about the dynamics between the two of them, Izuku and Katsuki had been friends 10 years ago. But once Katsuki's quirk had manifested, he has the power to secrete and detonate at-will nitroglycerin-like sweat from his palms to create powerful explosions. The teachers had started fawning over him and loading on the praise of how great he would be as a hero. A powerful quirk for a powerful hero. It had all gone straight to his head. Izuku had been happy for his friend, of course, and hoped that his quirk would just as cool as Katsuki's. But the universe seemed to be crueler than the boy ever could have imagined. Why? Because Izuku had been born with an extra joint in his toe that marked him as one of the shrinking number of quirkless people on the planet. For weeks, Izuku tried to use his mother's telekinesis or his father's fire breath, but nothing worked. But that wasn't what Katsuki had grown to hate about him. It was the fact that even though Izuku didn't have any powers, he still tried to be a hero, and the boy took that as wrongly as one could take it. His pride and arrogance had taken Izuku's kind and caring nature to a form of Izuku looking down on him, even though he was far stronger than the freckled boy. That had turned his friendship into violent bullying for the next 10 years, as Katsuki had freely used his quirk against other students, breaking several laws for underage quirk usage. And when Izuku had tried to curb his attitude, that violence had been turned on him. To return to the present, when Katsuki had heard that his former friend still intended to try for the UA exams, he had blown up, literally. He had blown up Izuku's desk, and then blown up Izuku's hero analysis for the future, a notebook full of handwritten notes on quirks, potential weaknesses, uses and other such writings, before carelessly tossing it out of the window, while advising him to take a leap from the school's roof while wishing for a quirk in the next life. That had been close to the final straw for Izuku, but as always, he endured it all. Thankfully, his notebook had miraculously survived, save for a few scorches around the cover and the edges, and some nibbles from some koi since it had landed in their pond. Then his day had gotten slightly better, after another bad turn of luck. While on his way home, passing beneath an overpass, Izuku had been attacked by a villain whose quirk turned his body into slime. The villain had been making an attempt to take over his body, nearly suffocating him to death, which was probably his plan all along. Thankfully, just as Izuku had started losing consciousness, his savior had come in the form of the world's greatest hero, All Might. All Might had stayed in the area long enough to secure the villain and revive him, and he had even autographed his notebook. But Izuku had desperately wanted more while the hero had seemed to want to leave him and latched onto his pants leg, ending up flying through the air with him as he jumped. When they had landed, All Might had berated him for the risk he had taken, but Izuku didn't mind it all that much as it gave him a chance to ask his question. And so he poured his heart out, saying that he wished to be a great hero like All Might, even though he was quirkless. That was when the best moment in his life had turned into the worst. Not only did Izuku find out that his idol had begun to lose his power due to an injury from a frighteningly powerful villain, but he told the boy the last thing he wanted to hear. Without the aid of a quirk, he could not be a hero. With that said, All Might had left him on the roof alone, unknowing just how close the boy had come to just stepping off the edge with a wish in his broken heart. But Izuku had immediately thought of his mother, and how sad she would be if he actually died. So here he was, being assaulted by some strange blue tick, and the pain that its bite was causing him was beyond anything he had ever felt before, including some powerful explosions from Katsuki. "Get off of me!" the boy shouted as he tried to reach the thing. "Do not struggle, Izuku Midoriya," said a voice in his head. "I am not your enemy." "Who said that?" Izuku snapped, looking around wildly, just as he felt something burrowing down his spine. Arg. His screams were echoing off of the alley walls like a gymnasium. "What are you doing to me?" "I am enhancing your body," the voice told him. "In your current state, you will not be able to fulfill your dream of becoming a hero." Izuku stopped struggling at the word hero while something began spreading out from the creature that was now attached to him. He looked down at himself and saw a thin layer of blue and black armor covering him from head to toe. "This armor will further aid you in becoming stronger as my host and as a hero." As the armor spread across his chest, the pain began to ebb away. He flexed his hands, feeling power coursing all over his body. What are you?" "I am 𝐒𝐻𝐻, or you may simply call me the Scarab," the voice said, "and you are now my host. We are bonded for the entirety of your natural life." Izuku felt something resembling a smile twitching at his lips, "And if it is your desire to become a hero, then it is my duty to ensure that you achieve that desire." I can be a hero?" His heart began to swell painfully. "A warning, you seem to be experiencing a cardiac event," the Scarab said. "Do you require medical treatment?" Izuku clutched at his chest, tears flowing from his eyes like rivers. "No. I'm okay. I'm happy." And noted. "Do you wish to make use of the armor?" the Scarab asked. Izuku was suddenly desperate for his notebook. "Yes. What can we do?" "I have injected your body with nanomachines to enhance your base speed, strength, and your durability," the Scarab said. "In this form, our combined capabilities will triple the enhancements I have initiated. Your physical muscle structure will also increase to better enhance your base speed and strength." Izuku had a boyish grin on his face. "I have super strength and super speed? This is so cool." "Your core temperature is 98.5, the Scarab said, thinking that he meant that his body felt cold. "If you are in need of warming yourself, this armor has thermal abilities." No, Izuku stammered. "I mean, cool is used as a term of excitement." Noted. Now the Scarab sounded bored. "Shall I explain our other capabilities?" Before Izuku could answer, an explosion erupted nearby, startling him. What was Dash? His face was then enveloped in a mask. "What the heck?" "Calm yourself, Izuku Midoriya," Scarab cautioned him. "This helmet possesses sensors which have indicated that a battle is taking place nearby." The Scarab now sounded happy. This is a perfect opportunity to see what our combined capabilities can do. Izuku frowned. I don't know about that. I mean, it's against the law for me to use my quirk too. Error. I am not a quirk. I am technology. The Scarab reminded him. Your laws on quirk usage are flawed in many ways, however. I do believe that using strengths granted by what you humans call support gear is allowed. There was amusement in the Scarab's voice. I believe that I fall under this category. Izuku chuckled. I guess you do, he said before he took off toward the explosion, finding his new speed surprising and welcome from his usual slowness. Oh, this is great. Your happiness over such a simple enhancement is amusing, the Scarab said. However, would it not be more efficient if you made use of the armor's flight capabilities? Izuku nearly tripped over his own feet. I can fly. He thought that he felt another wave of amusement washing through him. Whatever you can imagine, I can create. The antenna-like attachments above his shoulders sprang open, revealing translucent insect-like wings. Though I must warn you, while this armor is controlled by your mental capabilities, I can and will take control should a crisis arise in a form that you are unable to deal with. The Scarab informed him. I understand that lethal force is frowned upon in your society, so from this point on, unless you call upon me, I will remain in sleep mode. You won't be talking to me anymore? Izuku asked. But I don't even know what I can do. I repeat, whatever you can imagine, I can create. The Scarab said. However, before you, my previous hosts would form what you would call a staple gun, which worked well as a capture weapon. Other weapons included a sonic cannon, plasma cannon, and various melee weapons. The only thing that you need do is think of what you wish to form, and the armor will bend to that will. The Scarab said before another explosion erupted. I will now enter sleep mode. Good luck, my new host. Bibu, but what if I need help? Izuku shouted in panic. But the boy received no answer as, true to its word, the Scarab had gone silent. Oh man. He looked down at his newly armored hands. Staple gun? The armor around his right hand shifted seamlessly into a wide-barreled gun. Izuku grinned. Wow, this is amazing, he said. Deciding to test it out, he aimed it at a garbage can. A small mental command, and the garbage can was slammed and stapled to the alley wall by a huge brass-colored staple. Cool. The boy grinned before looking off toward the explosions where smoke was now rising. Okay, let's see what I can do like this, he said as he looked back at his new wings. Okay, fly? The wings did nothing, however. The boy began to rise into the air slowly. Right, Kajita told me that it's controlled by thought. He grinned as he lightly bopped his armor-covered head before looking back toward the rising smoke. Let's go. Izuku was suddenly shot into the air like a bullet out of the barrel of a gun. Whoa, this thing really moves. He nearly screamed as he angled himself toward the explosion site. In the distance he saw Mount Lady coming at a slow jog, which meant that the situation was well in hand. Only when Izuku perched himself on top of one of the buildings near the chaos he found that the situation was utterly out of control. Death Arms and Backdraft were running crowd control and fire control while Cammy Woods was rescuing civilians from the flames. Activate sensors, he said, wanting to know what was going on down below. Damn it, we can't get close to him with all those explosions going off. Death Arms shouted. We have to wait for a hero with the right quirk. Izuku frowned at that. He can't be serious. The boy huffed. His body's sturdy enough to handle some serious damage, and his arm-strengthening quirk could easily tank a blow from Muscular. He thought angrily. He turned his attention to Backdraft. My quirk isn't suited to this sort of fight. Backdraft was speaking to Death Arms. All I can do is keep the fires from spreading. The boy nodded. Okay, that I can understand that. Izuku sighed. He does manipulate water. Cammy Woods was of the same opinion as Death Arms, stating that his quirk wasn't right for the job, which Izuku thought was a pitiful excuse since his quirk allowed him to turn his arms into branches, which could grab and pull a target. What really got him was Mount Lady when she arrived. My only weakness, she said at the end of the street. I need at least a 2-lane street. Izuku nearly fell right off of his perch because of that one. Just shrink down. Izuku shouted at her, though she couldn't hear him over the chaos happening in front of them. And I thought she was impressive this morning. He shook his head and finally took a look toward the villain and froze. The villain was a writhing mass of green slime with large eyes, wide mouth, and a struggling blonde boy in its grasp. The very same villain that All Might had saved him from only an hour ago. How did he get loose? He shouted before he remembered seeing All Might showing him how he had contained the villain in a soda bottle, which he had stashed in his pants pocket, the same pocket that Izuku had latched onto. This is my fault. The boy felt himself shaking right as another explosion went off, which made him take a closer look at the hostage. A familiar ashen blonde head was just barely visible in the slime. Kaken, his former friend turned bully, was struggling to free himself, his quirk completely out of his control as the sludge villain was using it to keep the heroes back. Before Izuku even knew what he was doing, he was already flying from the roof he was perched on and rocketing in. Katsuki's eyes widened as he looked toward the source of the voice and saw the flying blue suit coming toward him. Izuku reached out his hand, zipping by to grab the boy's hand through the sludge before attempting to fly back into the air with his friend in tow. I don't think so. A slimy appendage whipped around and swatted him out of the air and slammed him into the concrete before he could gain any altitude. The sludge villain loomed over him. I don't know you, hero. That grotesque mouth grinned down at him as Izuku rolled to his feet, having taken no damage from the blow thanks to the Scarab's armor. Doesn't matter. I could even defeat All Might with this brat's quirk. You don't stand a chance against me. Izuku hadn't meant to gain any attention. Just a quick grab and go, but he hadn't accounted for the possibility of being caught by the villain. Rookie mistake, Izuku. He berated himself before he slowly rose to his feet. Now all eyes were on him. His heart rate had tripled in the time it took for him to stand up. But there's no going back now. His right arm morphed into the staple gun. The villain grinned at him. You're gonna fight me now? He sneered laughingly. All around them, the crowd and the heroes working them back had zeroed in on him. Hey, new guy. Death Arms shouted. Get the hell out of there. At least he's doing something. One of the spectators shouted at the hero. A woman took up the call. Yeah. Hurry up and take that slime guy down. She yelled out. That poor boy's suffocating. Izuku tried to ignore them, but he was still more nervous in that moment than he'd ever been in his entire life. One chance, Izuku said, a tremble in his voice. I'll give you one chance to let him go and surrender. The villain's eyes narrowed. I can hear your voice shaking, kid, he taunted him. You're not just new, you're young, and you're so scared that I bet you're close to pissing yourself. The villain began laughing. You really expect me to give myself up to a rookie like you when all these seasoned pros are too scared to get close to me? He whipped his slimy arms at him, Izuku dodging them easily, but the villain was relentless in his pursuit of him. I do gotta say, you got more balls than all these so-called heroes put together. He laughed as he chased after the boy. Izuku rolled to his feet and leapt into the air. That's because I'll never save anyone if I never try. He fired a round toward Katsuki, hoping the staple would catch him around the torso and pull him from the sludge villain's body, but the villain snatched it right out of the air. Nice try, kid, but I ain't as dumb as you seem to think. Izuku ground his teeth, seeing a blue-faced Katsuki struggling harder to breathe. Solid rounds are gonna be useless, he thought. Looking at the staple gun, I need something to contain him in, like that soda bottle. Vacuum gun, containment tank. Izuku's weapon morphed into a vacuum hose-like nozzle, while a large barrel formed at his back. All right. He darted down and dodged around the villain's thrashing arms, emitting explosions in all directions, and jammed the gun into his body. Now you're mine. What's that gonna what the? The villain roared as the gun activated and started sucking the villain's body into the tank. No. Not again. Not again. In a last-ditch attempt to free himself, the villain grabbed a large hunk of concrete that had been blown apart by the explosions and prepared to smash Izuku with it. Izuku raised his left arm, willing the armor to morph into a shield, but before the villain could bring it down on him, a huge, hulking figure appeared between them. That was well done, young hero, said the all-too-familiar voice of All Might. You've put me to shame today. He grasped the concrete and crushed it to dust. To meddle in affairs that are not their own is one of the key points of being a hero. Katsuki felt his mouth being cleared of the sludge, allowing him to take a much-needed breath while the villain was finally drawn completely into the containment vessel. Blue Beetle. The moment Izuku detached the contained villain down was the moment he made his exit. There was no way that he could have stayed when the police arrived to retrieve the villain. Technically, he had just performed vigilantism. Quirk or no quirk, he would have been in trouble if they had started asking questions. But the first thing he had done when he had flown away was find himself a quiet alleyway to change out of his armor, and then quietly make his way home. That was his plan, of course. I wonder if I can pass Khajiita off as a quirk? He muttered to himself as he made his way home half an hour after the incident. But if those reporters took any pictures of me, then the next time I use his armor, then I'm as good as dead when the police recognize me. He put his head in his hands and groaned. Oh, this was such a bad idea. I can't even think of a good way to pass this whole thing off. He slumped over in defeat. I mean, I can probably play it safe and lay low until the UA exams come up next year, but then I have deal with Kaken the entire time, so I found you, young Midoriya. All Might suddenly appeared from an alley. Startled, Izuku fell over backward. All Might. Yelped the startled teen. What? How did you get away from all those reporters? The #1 hero just grinned. No sweat. Dodging reporters is nothing for someone like 𝗧𝗪𝗧𝗏. All Might's boast was cut short by a sudden eruption of blood from his mouth that startled the boy even more as the giant of a man shrunk down into a skeleton-like form. Ahem. The man coughed as Izuku offered him his handkerchief. Thank you, my boy, he said as he wiped his mouth. I apologize for scaring you so much today, but I had to come find you and inquire about that strange armor you were wearing when you saved that young boy from that sludge villain. Izuku flinched. You knew. Of course I did, All Might said with a thin smile. Though you seem to have bulked up slightly since we last spoke, your frame hasn't changed at all. Also, I was in the crowd while you were fighting. I recognized your voice, even though I could tell that the mask you were wearing was warping it slightly. He continued to point out all the ways that he had identified the young man. I also could see some of your facial features through your mask. Izuku chuckled weakly. Why, I really hope you're wrong about that, he said as he thought of how angry Katsuki would be if he had figured out he was the one that had saved his life. Or else I might not live much longer. All Might chuckled. Not to worry, young Midoriya, I don't believe your friend realized it was you under there, he said. The boy was far too upset at being captured in the first place. He said, though I believe that we're off topic. You have some explaining to do, young Midoriya. Izuku frowned, and then launched into how he had descended from the building that they had spoken on top of to the street, and come across the strange organism that was Khajiita. Hearing that the strange Scarab had given him enhancements, All Might gave the boy a small pat down, noting that the boy now had a great deal more muscle than he had 2 hours ago. Then Izuku pulled up his shirt and showed him where the Scarab had attached itself to his spine. This thing, All Might said, I've never seen anything like it. I think Khajiita is old, like really old, the boy said as he put his shirt back into place. He said that it's had other hosts before me. All Might hummed and thought, that would explain why I don't recall a hero with an armor like the one you wore. He said, and your muscle structure seems to be increasing even as we speak, though not to the point of someone like myself when I make use of my quirk. I was hoping to take the UA exams, Izuku said timidly. But after what just happened, I'm not so sure if it'll be safe for me to try it or not. Because of the fact that your actions may have painted you as a vigilante? All Might asked with a soft chuckle. Let me tell you something, a teacher at UA actually works with vigilantes on a regular basis. He laughed as the boy gained a look of pure shock. Yes, we heroes have a dark side to them, or some of us do. He said, now, you said you wanted to enter UA? Izuku nodded. Yeah, I've always wanted to go there because it's famous for turning out the best heroes in Japan, he said with excitement. And it's the school that you attended, which makes it even greater since you became the country's top hero. All Might nodded. I understand, he smiled. You not only have an analytical mind, but you also have the heart of a true hero. He sighed, his smile falling. Young Midoriya, I truly have to apologize to you for my earlier words. Izuku looked at him in confusion. I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. He reminded the boy, who turned his eyes down. But Izuku looked up at him. This Scarab, this armor, has granted you something special. So I can say this with all my confidence. He placed his hand on the boy's shoulder. You, Izuku Midoriya, can be a great hero. Izuku's eyes began to tear up. And I intend to help you. A promising start and an offer. The day that Izuku heard the words that he had so wanted to hear for the entirety of his life was the day that he had the most awkward conversation of his life. All Might, whose real name was Toshinori Yagi, wanted to meet with his mother. The reason being that with Toshinori's promise to help him, he wanted to make sure things would be alright with his mom first. Fortunately or unfortunately, the woman had yet to come home from work, which meant that Izuku had to play the host to his idol, and the world's #1 hero. "You make a very fine tea, young Midoriya," he complimented as the boy sat across from him, a plate of rice crackers and a pot of freshly brewed tea between them. He looked around the home, seeing the meager trappings and belongings. I don't mean to imply anything, but is your family not well off?" Izuku paused as he was filling the man's cup. We get by," he said with a small sigh as he pushed the cup toward him before pouring one for himself. "My dad, when he found out I wouldn't manifest a quirk, he left, and we haven't heard from him since." Toshinori winced. "I'm truly sorry to hear that," the man said as he picked up his cup and took a sip. That's good," he complimented. "I take it you that have your mother's talent for homey comforts?" Izuku grinned bashfully. "Yeah, she taught me how to cook a few years ago, just in case she needed to work late." His grin fell slightly. "She doesn't normally have to, but there's been a few times that she's come home really tired and dash." Toshinori chuckled and waved the boy down. "No need to explain," he said with a smile. "I had a similar upbringing." He chuckled while the boy's eyes widened. "It's not so hard to believe, kid. I wasn't born with the title #1 stitched into my blanket." Izuku blushed, but nodded his head quickly. I know. But it's still hard to believe that the world's symbol of peace had a similar start to mine," the boy said bashfully as he sipped his tea. "But I bet that you had a better start than I did, and a somewhat normal quirk manifestation." Toshinori chuckled, seeing a great deal of irony in the boy's words. "Well, I would have to say that I got my quirk in a different way than most." He looked at the confused boy pointedly. "But you, young Midoriya, are quite unique. Not only did you have a quirk when we first spoke, but not half an hour later you appeared before me and a great many others as a hero in full armor, unrecognizable to most, and me if not for my sharp eye for details." He saw Izuku reach for the back of his neck. "The Scarab, or 𝗏𝗃, as you call it, is not any form of support gear I've ever seen, and it's far more advanced than anything that's been seen produced on Island." Izuku nodded. "I know," he said. "I've kept myself up to date with everything that comes off of Island in case there was something that would allow a quirkless young man to be a hero." Toshinori finished for him with a small sigh of his own. "But that doesn't seem necessary anymore." He grinned at the boy. "I've noticed that, since we've been sitting here, you've gained more muscle mass than when we spoke out on the street." Izuku looked down at himself and saw that his once scrawny arms were now well-toned and muscled. "Tell me, did the Scarab do anything else to you?" Izuku shook his head. "No, or at least not that I've noticed," he said with a look of concern. "𝗏𝗃 said that he would enhance my base strength and speed to help me use the armor more effectively, but apart from that, I don't think he's done anything else." "You call it a he?" Toshinori asked. At this the boy gave a slight lift of his shoulders. "He's intelligent, he's helped me, and given me the chance to be a hero," the boy said. "I'd say that's earned him the right to be considered a living being." "Point taken," the man chuckled. "Have you had any contact with 𝗏𝗃 since acquiring the armor?" "None," the boy said. He said that since heroes prefer non-lethal means of combat, he decided to enter what he called sleep mode. He frowned in thought, but he said if I needed him, all I had to do would be to call on him. Toshinori tapped his chin in thought. "I wonder if I could speak with him? I want to make sure his intentions aren't nefarious." Izuku looked over his shoulder, biting his lip. "𝗏𝗃? Can you hear me?" He felt the Scarab twitch ever so slightly. "I can. Do you have need of me, my host?" Izuku smiled at the man across from him. "He's awake." "Good." The man grinned. "Is there any way he can speak with me?" He got his answer a moment later as the boy, with the Scarab having overheard the question, stiffened. His back straightened and his eyes took on a dead look. "For what purpose do you wish to speak with me, human?" Toshinori blinked. "That is rather unnerving," he muttered. 𝗏𝗃, I believe you call yourself?" "My name is Toshinori, and I intend on training this young man whose body you now share," he explained, the boy's expression never changing. "I merely wish to know if there is any chance of you harming the boy?" Izuku shook his head. "No, I would never intentionally harm my host, as that would be counterproductive. Kajita said through the boy, though should my host's body come to harm, I have the ability to produce nanomachines capable of repairing any damage, including any limbs lost during combat. Kajita explained, but Toshinori noticed a twitch in the boy's brow. My host body seems nervous at the mention of dismemberment. Toshinori understood then that the twitch had been Izuku reacting to the Scarab's explanation. So he is conscious of you speaking with me right now? He asked. The Scarab made the boy's head bob up and down. He is. Though he is also not completely comfortable with my taking control of him like this. However, as you wish to speak with me, I deemed it necessary. The boy's mouth quirked up at the corner for a moment. I will make it a point in the future of asking my host's permission before taking control of his body again should the need arise. That would be advisable. Toshinori nodded. I won't keep you much longer. I do have a few simple questions, provided you wouldn't mind answering them. I do not. While in control, my host is in no danger from myself. Captivate said. Ask your questions. Toshinori nodded and leaned on his knees. You have gifted this boy, your host, with enhanced speed and strength. I need to know the extent of those enhancements if I am to begin training them. Understandable, said the Scarab. My host's new abilities are simply that of a child in their peak physical condition of my host's age. He explained, at peak condition, an adult human can lift upwards from 3 to nearly 5,000 pounds. However, as my host is still considered exceedingly young, enhancing his body to such an extreme would have called for muscle tearing and repairing on a massive scale, which would have called for much undue pain and suffering for my host. Not only that, I would be forced to increase my host's body to a much larger size, which would also mean he would lose a great deal of speed from the weight of his new muscle structure. Indeed, Toshinori said thoughtfully, I have seen those with super strength that possess large muscle structure, however they were extremely slow when in combat. He explained, I myself was lucky enough that my body was large for someone my age as a young man. As such, my quirk was able to adapt and grant me a form of enhanced speed. Kajita nodded. A lean yet powerful body as he has now is ideal for using the armor I granted him. The Scarab said, my host is currently memorizing our conversation for later in order to physically document it. He commented. Though my host is not on the same level as some with enhanced strength and speed, he is able to move many times his own weight, which is tripled when using my armor. The Scarab went on, peak human speed tops at approximately 30 miles an hour. The Scarab said, my host is capable of running that speed now for extended periods of time without tiring. Toshinori chuckled as he committed the boy's new capabilities to memory. That's going to be a good template to start with, he said with a smile on his face. I do believe you've also made this boy quite happy. The chemicals that are entering his brain at the moment would suggest so. The Scarab said, much to the blonde man's amusement. Do you have more questions? Or have I given you adequate answers? Just one other question, and you can give the young man back his body. He said, can you, if the boy asked it of you, activate this boy's latent quirk gene? The Scarab looked at him for a moment, Izuku's dead eyes seeming to gain some life to them for a moment before they were controlled. My host does, indeed, have a latent quirk gene. The Scarab said, from what my nanomachines have discovered, my host has latent pyrokinetic abilities, quite powerful abilities I might add. This quirk, as you have called it, would undoubtedly be passed on to his future offspring without question as it is. It was strange to see the Scarab trailing off, and Toshinori had to wonder just how powerful the boy could have been if that quirk had activated. The boy's body can't handle the quirk's power, can it? Toshinori sighed, lacing his fingers together as he rested his chin there. There is a theory in our world, perhaps you've seen it in young Midoriya's memories, that quirks will continue to merge and evolve as they're passed along to each new generation until one emerges that is so powerful that it's uncontainable and bring about the end of this world. Is his such a quirk? The Scarab was quiet for a moment. If the time ever arose that I was forcibly separated from my host, and my host survived the process, I would make certain that my host's body could handle his latent power before the quirk was activated. The Scarab said, it is indeed a powerful quirk, however. My host's mind is far more formidable than anyone human can fathom. Toshinori smiled. That, he said with a much lighter tone, is a good thing to know. I can see that you actually care for the boy, despite being a machine for all intents and purposes, and I have no problems with training the boy as long as I know that you will look after him when I cannot. Then we are in agreement, said the Scarab. Before I return control of this body to my host, I would like to pose a question to you. Toshinori frowned, but saw no harm in at least one question. Ask away. Izuku tilted his head, seeming curious. My host's memories recall that you are unable to perform your duties as a hero of this world for an extended amount of time? Toshinori winced at the mention of his failing abilities. I see that you are uncomfortable with this subject. Kajita bowed Izuku's head. Apologies. There's no need. Toshinori sighed before he raised his shirt to show the possessed teen his left side. If you've already seen it from his memories, then you know that my respiratory system is shot and my entire stomach was destroyed. I can barely stomach food, and it's difficult to breathe at the best of times, hence my habit of coughing up blood when I overexert myself. Izuku's eyes seemed concerned for the man, though at present, Toshinori couldn't tell if it was the boy feeling the concern or Kajita. I would assume that your powers are also weakening due to your continued use of them? The Scarab asked with a hint of sadness entering Izuku's voice. Not weakening per se, Toshinori said as he settled his shirt back into place. My quirk is as strong as ever, but my body is a different story. The more I use my quirk, the weaker my body gets. He admitted with some sadness in his voice, I can only do hero work for around 3 hours a day, and even that's pushing it. Soon I won't be able to do anything without nearly killing myself. The Scarab nodded. If you are not adverse to the idea, I do have a method of restoring your body to what it once was, he said as Toshinori's head shot up in interest. And the catches? The man didn't doubt the seemingly alien machine, but such a claim couldn't be without a risk. Kajita raised Izuku's left arm, the limb becoming encased in the Scarab's blue armor. He turned the palm of their combined hand upward, and a small cylinder rose up. There is no catch other than the discomfort of injecting yourself with these nanomachines I have produced. He placed the cylinder on the table between them. There will be pain. Regrettably, it is unavoidable. Kajita explained, once injected into the bloodstream, they will rebuild all that your body has lost. When they are finished with their task, they destroy each other, and you will be as you once were. Your quirk and your body will be at full capacity. Toshinori's eyes gleamed at the small tube. You would not offer to do something like this without requesting something in return. Kajita shook Izuku's head. That is a human way of thinking, the Scarab said. I am not human. I only ask that you continue to train and mentor my host, he went on, and that you not allow anyone to attempt removing myself from my host. Not only would they kill my host, but I would be forced to defend myself and my host. I do not wish to kill anyone that could potentially call my host their friend. Toshinori reached out and took the blue cylinder. I will hold on to this, for now, he said. I'm not sure if I trust you enough to use it, but I don't doubt that your intentions are good. I may use it when I feel my time is near its end. I cannot make your choices for you, the Scarab said. I will now return my host's body to him and re-enter sleep mode. The Scarab bowed their head. Please treat him well. Izuku's head remained bowed for a moment longer than Toshinori would have liked and began to worry before the boy's head snapped right up. Yikes. That was weird. He shivered. Toshinori chuckled. Try being on the other end of that conversation. He told the boy, it was rather unnerving to talk to you with such a vacant look in your eyes. He explained before looking at the tube in his hands. Though I will say that this Scarab friend of yours does seem to want to make sure that you're on my good side, at least if these nanomachines are as efficient as he claimed. Izuku looked at him excitedly. Are you going to use them? Not just yet, the blonde said as he tucked the nanomachines away in his pocket. It's not that I'm not grateful, he said as the boy looked down in disappointment. The truth of it is, I'm worried about what it might do to my quirk, even though the Scarab told me that they wouldn't affect it. Why would they hurt your quirk? Izuku asked just as he heard a rattle at the front door. The door opened up to reveal a rather short, plump woman that had tidy green hair tucked up into a bun at the back of her head. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Midoriya yelped when she saw Toshinori sitting on their couch. I didn't know we'd be having a guest over, mister? Her eyes were darting around the room as if looking for something to use as a makeshift weapon. Toshinori chuckled. Please, ma'am, there's no need for alarm, he said as he gestured to the boy. Your son and I met earlier today and again not an hour ago, he said, rising to introduce himself. My name is Toshinori Yagi, a representative of the Might Towers Hero Agency. Might Towers? Inko blinked owlishly. As in the same agency run by All Might himself? Toshinori laughed as the similarities between Izuku and his mother became much clearer. Indeed it is, Miss. Inko blurted out suddenly before gaining an utterly neon blush across her cheeks. I'm no longer married, so... Toshinori felt a bit of heat in his face as well while the boy just grinned at his mother. The woman in question caught it and gave the boy a slight glare before she noticed the difference in her son's physique. Izuku Midoriya, what in the world happened to you? She demanded sharply. Oh goodness, are you taking those god-awful steroids I've been hearing about? Children your age shouldn't be. Mom. Izuku roared in embarrassment. I'm not on steroids. Toshinori was nearly doubled over in his attempts to stifle his laughter. I must agree with young Midoriya, Mississippi. He chortled. His sudden change in appearance is part of the reason I'm here, actually. He gestured to the small chair between himself and the boy. I think you'd best sit down, however, as this may be a bit of an ordeal for you. Inko did as suggested while Izuku got another cup and poured tea for her. Then the boy launched into the same explanation he had with Toshinori. He went as far as to show her where Scarab had attached himself, and even summoning his new armor. Seeing the strange organism attached to her son's spine nearly gave her a heart attack. Toshinori then went on to explain how he had questioned the Scarab himself in order to ascertain if he meant to harm her son, only to find that he had been granted enhanced abilities that would allow him to wield the armor effectively. Inko palmed her forehead. This is all quite a lot to take in. Toshinori nodded in understanding. I can only imagine what it's like as his mother to hear about all of this, he said before gesturing to the boy. However, though I'm sure that Kajito would never harm him, I think it would be best if we enrolled him in a hero school. UA's entrance exams aren't so far away at the moment, and the boy has certainly shown interest in attending. Inko looked at him. Tuition could be a bit of a problem. She looked around at their cozy little apartment. I don't mean to undermine your intentions, Mr. Yagi, but... Toshinori held up a hand to halt her worries. Madam, there is no need at all to worry yourself over something so trivial, he said as the woman looked at him. Might Towers, though it isn't well known, offers academic scholarships to certain young students that are shooting for UA. If young Midoriya passes the entrance exams, then All Might himself will be funding his schooling from that point on as soon as the paperwork is all sorted out. Not a penny out of your pocket. Inko looked at him as if he'd just handed her $1 million check. All Might would do that. Indeed. As a matter of fact, the man himself saw the boy in action earlier today, he said, and Izuku paled, though it was an act of vigilantism. Young Midoriya here left quite the impression on more than one person when he used that unique armor of his to subdue a villain that was threatening one of his friends. Inko's head whipped around so fast that Izuku was positive that he heard a crack. You did what? Beetle. As the evening wore on, Toshinori had to force himself to leave the Midoriya home, finding that he rather enjoyed spending time with the little family. Inko in particular had been rather adamant that he stay for dinner, even though he had explained that his physical condition didn't allow him to stomach much of anything. But the woman was not to be denied as she offered him a small salad which he managed to keep down. Thank heaven for that. The tube of nanomachines seemed to heat up in his pocket, reminding him that it was there for him to use whenever he wished. I chose to become a teacher so that I could find a successor, he thought to himself as he made his way toward the train station. Yet, here I am, with an opportunity to put my body back to the way it was before him. His thoughts of a successor brought up memories of a conversation that he had had with his former sidekick, 𝗧𝗏𝗍, about passing his power on to a protege of his own. The boy that his old friend had presented to him was much like himself in his younger days, all smiles and full of pride in his work. Not like many of society's heroes that wanted to make names for themselves for nothing but money and fame. He chuckled when he thought of Izuku becoming a hero. The boy certainly had the right mindset for how he wanted his successor to be, but not only did he have the Scarab to help him, but the odd little piece of technology had the power to awaken the boy's latent quirk. A powerful quirk if the little machine was to be believed. Reaching into his pocket and pulling out his cell phone, he pressed his thumb to an older friend's number. Hello, David. He spoke into the phone. It's Toshi. Toshi. The voice on the other end of the phone questioned sleepily. Ugh, do you have any idea what time it is here? He chuckled. Yes, I know it's late, but I have something rather important that I want your opinion on. Oh yeah? David asked, sounding more awake now. That's rare. Normally you only need my help with what you'd call technocrap. He laughed. Toshinori laughed right along with him. Ironic that you would phrase it like that, old friend, he said, thinking of the nanomachines in his pocket and the strange insectoid machine. There's a boy I've taken an interest in training, but he seems to have a strange form of technology that's attached itself to him. David was quiet for a moment before speaking up. Is it something like what the HPSC would come up with? No, it's nothing like that, the man said. It's like nothing I've ever seen, and what's more, it seems to be sentient, like one of those quirks with a mind of its own. He told the man, I know you've worked with unknown tech before, so I'd like to hear what you have to say about this one. He said before the man started making arrangements. His training's going to be done at Dagobah Beach, you know, the one that's a popular dump site? I intend to have him clean it. Yeesh, that's gonna be 6 kinds of hell, David said before chuckling again. I tell you, Toshi, you put a whole new shine on the word overkill. He laughed while the shrunken hero blushed. But it'll be good to see you at least. Plus I'm interested in this strange technology you've told me about. Toshinori chuckled. Yeah, it'll be good to see you, too, and bring Melissa along, he said. The boy could use a friend in the tech industry. And, well, he could use more real friends, he said with a small look back at the apartment. Right. And it's not just that you want to see your favorite niece, right? David's voice held a smirk. I'll bring her. Just don't try to set her up with the kid, all right? I'm not ready to start chasing boys away from her yet. Right, sure you're not, Dave. Toshinori laughed heartily. Thanks for understanding. I'll see you soon. When Izuku woke up the morning following his second meeting with his favorite hero, and his potential lifelong grounding threat from his mother, should he ever perform vigilantism again, Izuku found himself awake much earlier than he normally awakened, even by his alarm clock. It was 5 a.m., which was just an hour before his mother woke up to make breakfast before she went off to work. On the days she worked late, she was allowed to arrive at a later time for the next shift. Without even thinking about, Izuku rolled out of bed and strolled out of his room toward the kitchen. School was a few more hours away, so he had plenty of time to prepare himself. So he started making breakfast for his mother. He checked the fridge and found that they had enough for a decent spread. As he got started, he felt something at the back of his neck. Kajita. Yes. The Scarab said, I did not mean to alarm you. Izuku gave a soft smile as he continued working. You didn't, he said. I just thought you might be awake when I felt a tickle at the back of my neck. He started filling the rice cooker. Is everything okay? He felt amusement from the Scarab. I believe that is a question that I should be asking, is it not? Kajita questioned. To respond to your query, there is nothing that is wrong with myself, however, while you rested, I was able to do a full scan of your body. Izuku frowned as the Scarab seemed worried. Was there something wrong with him? I do not wish to be rude as you and I now share a body, however. Your torso and arms seem to have suffered some form of trauma that has left heavy surface scarring. Now Izuku understood why he seemed worried. Were you attacked by someone with destructive abilities? Izuku sighed as he took a bowl from the cabinets and cracked a couple of eggs into it to begin whisking. Can't you just see what happened from my memories? He asked as he started work on a rolled omelet. Indeed, I could, however I believe that would be an invasion of your privacy. That made the boy laugh. Invasion of privacy? He snorted. You literally burrowed your way into my spine. I think we're way past invasive. Your point is noted, however. Your thoughts and your memories are your own unless you are speaking directly to me, the Scarab explained. My hosts in the past were also not pleased to know that I had sifted through their memories to learn more about them, so I have restrained myself from doing so, though I do know that you have wanted to be a hero since you were an infant, and that many have discredited you for striving to achieve your goal since you lack the special powers that would have allowed you to do so. Izuku snorted as he began heating up a skillet. That's putting it mildly, he muttered, a small half-smirk on his face. You can go ahead and look through my memories, Kajita, I don't mind. Gratitude. Though I must warn you that you will feel slight discomfort. He warned the boy before starting. The discomfort that the Scarab had warned him about came when the boy started seeing flashes of his childhood, particularly those that involved a certain explosive blonde boy that had once been his best friend. In the back of his mind, he could feel Kajita growing angry. Finally, he came to the most recent of memories, Katsuki Bakugo telling him to jump from the roof, wishing for a quirk in his next life after reincarnation. By the time the Scarab had finished sifting through his memories, Izuku, with shaking hands, had finished cooking breakfast for his mother and himself. "I can tell you want to say something, Kajita," Izuku said as he began setting the table before moving over to make a fresh pot of coffee. "Go ahead and say what you have in mind." The Scarab was quiet for a long while before speaking. "The only thing that I wish to inquire about is why you still view that creature as a friend," Kajita said, his mood difficult to judge from his mechanical tone. "I have had many hosts, Izuku Midoriya, but few have ever been injured as you have, and by someone that has clearly broken several laws in your society." Izuku sighed as the coffee brewed. "I brought a lot of it on myself." "Doubtful?" The Scarab sounded like it was scoffing. "Even before it was found out that your meta powers would never manifest, that boy obviously went out of his way to be cruel to you," he said as his host took a pair of coffee mugs from the cabinet. "And the only time I see you bringing such violence on yourself was when you defended another child from this fool's wrath." He felt the Scarab on his back twitch. "I realize that you are a gentle person, Izuku Midoriya. However, this friend of yours deserves none of your friendship." "I know that you're right about that," Izuku sighed, "but Kaken was a good person before he got his quirk." "Power will sometimes change a person for the worse," the Scarab admitted. "Oftentimes that person will become what you would undoubtedly call a villain in your current society." Izuku outright laughed. "You find this amusing?" Izuku shook his head. "Sort of," he said as he took the pot of coffee and set it on the table. "Because for the longest time, Kaken and I have been trying to be the same hero." This seemed to confuse the Scarab. "Elaborate, please." The boy shrugged. "You probably know this from my memories, but he and I both idolize All Might as a hero," he went on, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "I admired him because no matter the situation, All Might always wore that huge smile on his face, and it brought comfort to those he was helping. And we both know that that smile he wears is worn because he now hides his fear," Kajita pointed out as he recalled the memory of Toshinori Yagi lifting up his short to reveal his injury to his host, and explaining how he smiled to hide his fear. "Still though," Izuku shrugged, "it takes a lot of courage to do what heroes do," he said, "and All Might still does the amazing and near impossible when he's been hurt so badly." "Noted." The Scarab relented. "You were telling me how the pair of you admired him for different reasons." Izuku nodded as he took a small sip of his coffee. "Kaken always admired him because he never lost to an opponent," he said and set the cup down. "See? That's where Kaken and I differ. I want to bring comfort to those that I save with a smile on my face," he sighed as he thought back to Katsuki's bullheadedness. "And Kaken thinks that being the greatest hero means never losing to anyone." The Scarab mulled that over for a moment. "I believe that you are both slightly flawed in your thinking," he said, catching the boy's attention. "It has been said that a hero is one that gives of himself, often at great risk of themselves, and always for the good of others. But I have seen that what is seen as good for others is always in conflict." "Well, what do you think?" Izuku asked, wanting the Scarab's opinion. "You've lived a long time and had other hosts besides me. So what do you think makes a good hero?" "Many of my hosts displayed many different qualities that you would approve and disapprove of," Kajita said. "You're the first host I have had in over 300 years. Before the true advancement of what you call quirks, many humans that called themselves superheroes were genetically or mechanically enhanced as you are since we are bonded. There were also others that hailed from different planets that have long since integrated into your society through breeding, becoming part of the human race, which is where, I believe, your society became so abundant in superpowered beings." "That's amazing," Izuku said, filing away the information for later. "Hardly," said the Scarab. "Many of those superpowered individuals were nefarious in nature, and even those that fought them were viewed as threats to the world." Kajita paused. "I am glad that that is no longer the case, even though it seems being a hero is now considered another form of employment." The boy shrugged. The government didn't like the idea of vigilantism being more effective than the police force, so they decided to start employing them as government-paid heroes, almost like a more advanced police force. Now there are schools across the world that train the next generation. "Which is what you are striving for," Kajita said. "To answer your previous query, I have found that truly heroic individuals were compassionate and empathetic toward others." Izuku smiled at that. "That sounds like something All Might would agree with," he said, cocking his head to the side when he heard stirring in his mother's room. "Sounds like Mom's getting up." He was proven right a few minutes later as his mother came out of her bedroom, fully dressed and ready for a long day at the hospital. She saw her son working in the kitchen and smiled. "Oh, sweetheart, you didn't have to do this," she said as he poured her a cup of coffee. "I know you must have needed the rest after the day you had." The boy just shook his head. "I feel fine, Mom, really," he said as he pulled out a chair for her. "Besides, I don't mind doing this. Still, though, I think you should take this day off and rest," his mother said, much to his surprise as she didn't normally approve of her son missing a single day of school. "And I was planning to take the day off so that we could head to the quirk registration office. I'm sure that the principal will understand." Izuku frowned. What are we going to tell them?" His mother shrugged. "What can we tell them?" she asked. "Not the truth, certainly not. You'd be taken away and dissected like a lab rat. I find that idea exceedingly unfavorable for a multitude of reasons," the Scarab said while Izuku shivered at the very thought of something like that happening to him. Then there was the fact that Kajita had made it very clear that he would defend himself if Izuku couldn't. He didn't even want to think of what the Scarab was capable of on his own. "We'll simply say that your quirk finally manifested," she said with her son giving her a skeptic look. "Oh, don't look at me like that, dear. It wasn't so long ago that over half the population was still quirkless. Back then, someone in their 30s could manifest a quirk, with or without that antiquated toe joint test." Izuku frowned. "But I was seen using our armor. What if I get arrested?" She sighed deeply. "I suppose we'll cross that bridge when we get to it," she said as they began eating the breakfast he had made. "We can't very well keep your friend a secret forever, dear." The Scarab twitched at the back of his neck. "I believe she is right, 𝗂𝐭𝐴 Midoriya," he said. "I have already devised a slightly believable narrative in mind to explain myself as a quirk." "Oh yeah," Izuku said out loud with a look over his shoulder, his mother looking at him in interest. "Oh, Kajita has an idea about how to tell people that he's a quirk." His mother nodded. "Let's hear it then." "Simply put, your mother's quirk, as explained by yourself, is an untrained form of telekinesis, which can be defined or branched off into several different powers depending on the genetics involved. Provided that your mother has the potential in her genes, you would be able to explain my manifestation as a form of technokinesis, an exceedingly rare form of telekinetic ability that involves technology in any shape or form." When Izuku repeated the Scarab's explanation to his mother, she seemed thoughtful for a moment, before she gained a small smile. "You know, it may just work," she said to the pair. "I'm a fourth-generation quirk user, meaning my family has only recently come away from a quirkless standing. My great-grandfather had a very weak form of technokinesis that could control some minor forms of technology like cars and other vehicles." "Wow, I didn't know we had someone like that in the family." Izuku smiled. His mother nodded. "It's true, dear. As a matter of fact, your father and I once talked about the possibility of you being pyrokinetic," she sighed. "Sadly, that wasn't the case. Your father was actually a first-generation quirk user, which meant any children sired by him had a lower possibility of having a quirk." Izuku chuckled. When his father had left, he blamed Inko for their son not having a quirk. Izuku knew that it wasn't true, as most quirks were primarily passed on through the paternal side of the family, the maternal side taking over only if the quirk was stronger. If the quirks of both parents were compatible enough, there was a 50-50 chance that the quirks would combine into a single, new mutation, oftentimes being stronger than both. "Passing Kajita off as a stronger version of your quirk is a good idea," the boy said thoughtfully, "but how do I explain him being attached to my spine?" His mother giggled. "Well, dear, you've heard of sentient quirks, haven't you?" she asked as the boy nodded. "They're very rare, but not unheard of, sweetie. Which is exactly what we'll tell the people at the quirk registration office." Izuku frowned. "Mom, I don't think you know what I mean," he said before he turned around and pulled up his shirt, showing her just how attached Kajita was to his spine. "Oh," his mother breathed out. She could clearly make out the twisting blue lines under his skin where the Scarab had burrowed its way into her son. "Yeah," Izuku sighed as he let his shirt fall back into place. "They'll want to give me a physical, and when they do, they'll find out just what Kajita is." He and his mother were quiet for a moment while they thought about what to do. "How do we explain this?" "I believe I have a suggestion that may be viable," the Scarab answered, Izuku passing his words to his mother. "You are both on the correct path. However, the fact remains that not only is my host registered as a non-meta, but as he has stated, I appear to be an intruder. A parasite, if you will. However, as your mother has stated, sentient quirks are not out of the ordinary. The only way to explain this would be to take it a step beyond that, and introduce me as a parasitic quirk that can and has chosen Izuku Midoriya as my new host. As Inko listened to her son explaining what the Scarab had in mind, she found herself nodding. It's not a bad plan, but we still run the risk of them wanting to study you, Kaji. In answer, the Scarab stabbed out 2 exceedingly sharp insectoid legs. Then I shall defend my host, and therefore myself. Izuku groaned. Hey, this is one of my favorite shirts. He complained as the Scarab raked its appendages. His mother giggled. Sweetie, you have 2 shirts that have the kanji for t-shirt written on them. That's not the point, the boy whined. I like this one because of the color. Izuku Midoriya, unlike my previous hosts, you lack a great deal of fashion sense. Beetle. Might Towers, Minato. Tokyo, Toshinori Yagi's private office. Toshinori frowned as the man sitting in front of him examined the small vial that contained the Scarab's nanomachines. Well, he said as David sat the container down. What do you think? David Shield, a man of medium build with square-rimmed glasses, smiled at him. In all honesty, he said, I wish my tech was this advanced. He said while adjusting his glasses. I can't really tell you anything concrete without putting these little guys under an electron microscope and maybe dismantling one of them to analyze their circuitry, but if I had to take a shot in the dark, it would be with these things. Toshinori leaned back in his seat with a sigh. The Scarab assured me that these little wonders would restore my body to its previous state, but I'm still a little hesitant, he said. I have no idea how they will affect my quirk. David frowned. If the boy that this Scarab is attached to feels that it's telling the truth, then I think you should trust it, he said, leaning back in his own seat, turning the little vial over in his hands. From what you've told me of this young man, he's a lot like you were in your younger days. Toshinori laughed at that with a nod. And if what you've told me of this entity is true, then it holds this young man in very high regards, so I doubt that it would try to harm someone that the boy respects so much. Toshinori was silent for a moment, reaching out to take the vial from his friend. You really think it's safe? I do, he nodded, lacing his fingers together to lean on them. The world isn't ready to lose All Might Toshi, but at the rate you're going, you won't last another year. He sat back with a sigh. I know you're planning to retire soon to take up teaching, but you'd be a lot better off if you didn't have to worry about running out of time before classes end. Toshinori was looking down at the vial of nanomachines precariously. I don't think I should be the pillar of peace anymore. David looked at him in alarm. What? Why? Toshinori looked up at him. David, I nearly crushed that boy's dreams. I probably did. He shook his head, yet he doesn't hold anything against me. That's how kind he is. That doesn't mean you don't deserve the chance to make it up to him, David said with a small frown. Listen, Toshi, I get it. You hurt someone you were trying to protect. It happens. No one's perfect. He sat back. If we were, then my wife would still be alive after I found the cure for her cancer. He muttered sadly, the shrunken hero looking at him in surprise. But we're not. My wife died holding both mine and my daughter's hands. You defeated one of the greatest villains that's ever been known, but you can't do your job anymore because he nearly took you with him. David leaned forward again. But you have a chance here, Toshi. He pointed to the nanomachines. Not only can you regain your strength, but you can make sure that that boy you think you failed becomes one of the best heroes out there, and make sure that you can be the person he looks up to. Toshinori saw the man's reasoning, but still hung his head. It's not just that, he sighed. Haven't you noticed that a lot of heroes are getting downright lazy these days? He frowned as he thought back to the previous day. Kamui Woods, Mount Lady and Death Arms almost allowed a middle school student to be murdered in broad daylight, and in front of a crowd, all because they didn't want to risk it. He spat in disgust. No. I can't be the only pillar holding up our society. Not when there's so many just riding on my cape. David smirked at him. You haven't worn a cape since the incident with that missile. Toshinori blushed while David started laughing at him. I still can't get that look on your face out of my head. It could have happened to anyone. Toshinori half shouted in embarrassment. Who knocks out the bad guy and doesn't disarm the missile before chatting up the cute hostage? He laughed, deepening the hero's embarrassment. That was the highlight of our first year together as partners. I mean, in the history of heroes, you're the only one that had their cape snag on a rocket just as it was taking off. Will you listen? Toshinori begged while the man regained some control over himself. Anyway, as I was saying, I'm planning to take this chance at UA to bring the next generation into the full force, he continued with a small cough. It's like I said, I can't be the singular pillar of peace as I have been. I can't be everywhere at once. It's a small mercy that Star and Stripes taking up the role in America. David chuckled. She's doing pretty good as far as being the #1 hero in America, he said. Still not as popular as you are, though. Popularity is a big part of the whole problem in some cases. Toshinori said, Endeavor's methods are extreme, but he's earned his spot more times than I can count with how many cases he's solved. He's beaten me in that regard, he chuckled. Doesn't make him less of a prick, though. David shrugged. His whole problem is that he's too indifferent to his true admirers. He sat back with a thoughtful look on his face, and he's brutal. His kill count is higher than yours right now. Toshinori nodded. He can't really help that part. He said in the man's defense, his Hellflame quirk makes it impossible for him to do anything without excessive force. He recalled a few times that he'd been forced to team up with the man. Brutal would have been an understatement in his treatment of the villains. But back to what I was talking about. Once I start teaching, the first years I'm going to be mentoring will be groomed to be the pillars that hold our society up when I finally do retire from active duty. Not a single pillar, but hundreds. All of them supporting each other and the society that we fought for. He spread his arms out widely. David smirked at him. That sounds like an electoral speech, Toshi, he jibed. If I didn't know any better. Oh, please, Toshinori shook his head. That's the last job I'd want. Still, this is a pretty bold move on your part, David said, looking down at the nanomachines he still held. But I can see you being there for a long time, provided your mind is made up. Toshinori sighed as he brought the vial up. It is. He sighed as he pressed a button on the side, prompting a needle to slide out of the end of it. Toshinori raised his eyes to his friend. The Scarab said that there would be pain. Will you stay? David nodded. I'm not going anywhere, old friend. Toshinori smiled at him before he rolled up his sleeve and jabbed the needle into his arm. There was a hiss as the nanomachines were injected, but other than the sting of the needle. Strange, he muttered as he placed the empty vial on the table between them. From what the Scarab told me, I would have thought that there'd be it. Toshi. David rose as his friend suddenly clutched at his side, vomiting blood onto the table. Izuku was extremely nervous when he woke up the day after he and his mother had registered Kajita as a quirk. The fact that there seemed to be a type of quirk that was not only sentient, but independently sought out specific hosts was something no medical practitioner had ever seen. While it certainly wasn't beyond the realm of possibility, it was something entirely new to the world of quirk studies. And, as Izuku had feared, they had tried to take a sample from the Scarab. Needless to say, Kajita had made good on his promise to defend himself, and Izuku was certain that the doctor would never be the same after the incident. But it had gone over as he and his mother had wished. Izuku Midoriya was now registered as having the first ever recorded sentient parasitic quirk in history, and it was marked down as highly aggressive. The way that the doctor decided to explain the appearance of the Scarab was rather simple. Animals, while rare, were beginning to manifest quirks. A prime example would be the principle of the very school that Izuku was aiming to apply for UA. The Scarab, obviously, was an undiscovered quirk-wielding parasitic beetle, which made its way to Japan and then chose Izuku as its host. Kajita remarked that the doctor was an exceedingly insulting buffoon. But now that Izuku was no longer registered as quirkless, he could now start toward entering UA as he had wanted all along. Of course, that did nothing to stop his nerves as he stood outside of the school's gates. Your hesitation is understandable given how you have been treated at this establishment, the Scarab told him with a small tickle at the back of his neck. However, I would remind you that you are no longer alone, nor unable to defend yourself. That's sort of what I'm afraid of, Izuku said to the Scarab. I know you don't like people threatening me, but you've got to be careful, he said, thinking about some of the consequences should his friend injure anyone. He felt a sense of annoyance from the Scarab. I promise that I will only react to deter further action against you, Kajita said. I believe the adjective is an eye for an eye, is it not? Great, the boy muttered as he started toward the school. As he entered and walked through the halls to his classroom, he was well aware that the other students were all looking in his direction, the opposite of what he was accustomed with. They're all looking at me. You need not worry, Kajita remarked. They are wondering about your new quirk. That didn't make the boy feel any better, but he was happy that none of them decided to approach him. "Hey, Deku." Oh no, he had spoke too soon as he heard the familiar voice of the last person he wanted to see. He turned around and plastered a shaky smile on his face. "Oh, hey, Kaken." The blonde boy was standing right behind him as he turned, a sneer on his face as usual. "The fuck is this I hear about you having a quirk?" he demanded. "That shit can't be true." "What an unpleasant creature." 𝗏𝗧𝗄𝐻 sounded like he was huffing. Izuku's eyes wandered back over his shoulder. "That's just how he is." Unfortunately for him, Bakugo saw the eye movement as an attempt to ignore him. "Hey, don't you look away when I'm talking to you, you bastard." He reached out and grabbed him by the front of his uniform. Izuku felt himself being lifted off the ground, but the real problem was when he felt the beetle armor spreading over the skin of his back. "Kaken, don't. Shut the hell up," and he was cut off abruptly when two insect-like appendages burst out of the back of Izuku's uniform. He felt the blow against him before he saw what exactly hit him. Izuku almost lost it when the two arms came out and struck his former friend in the ribs with enough force to stagger him. But thankfully the Scarab had been serious when it had told him that her would not use lethal force. The ends of the appendages were rounded, like boxing gloves. But that didn't mean that Bakugo was not feeling a searing pain in his ribs. "You son of a..." Bakugo looked up at him with pure malice across his face, right up until he saw what had hit him. "Wait, those arms." Izuku was panicking now. "It seems he recognizes the armor," 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 said with a hint of amusement. I've got to get to class now, Kaken, bye-bye." Izuku blurted out hurriedly before turning tail and running down the hall to the classroom. "Hold it," Bakugo shouted after him. Thankfully, Izuku was safe from the blonde's wrath when he got to his seat. That was too close. The boy sighed as he took his seat. "Did you have to hit him that hard?" he asked of the Scarab. "I could hardly call that a tap," 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 sounded miffed. "Furthermore, Izuku Midoriya, I believe that this Katsuki Bakugo creature is a direct threat to your well-being." The Scarab went on as the boy set his book bag down and pulled out his notebook. "As such, I will not hesitate to deter any aggressive behavior he shows toward you." "You're probably going to encourage it," Izuku thought idly, knowing that Bakugo would undoubtedly see the attack as a challenge, and that was one thing that he hated the most, challenges from those he thought weaker than himself. Thankfully, when Bakugo staggered into the classroom, the teacher was already there and ready to begin the day. Of course, the worst possible thing happened. "So, Midoriya," the boy jumped when the teacher called out to him, "I've been told that you have a quirk now," he said as the rest of the class turned their eyes on him. "Congratulations. I'm looking forward to seeing what it can do." "I heard he gave Bakugo a real good hit to the ribs," one student said in a hushed tone that was heard by everyone, including the teacher. But before the man could say anything, the aforementioned blonde exploded. "He didn't do shit to me." His palms went off in loud pops and crackles that had the other students cowed. "Bakugo, sit down and do not use your quirk again," the teacher said as the boy snarled at him. "First and last warning," he said before turning his attention back to the green-haired boy. "And Midoriya, I know that you must be excited about your new quirk, but I'm not going to treat you any different than the rest of the students," he said while the boy hung his head, "which means no quirk usage inside the school. That rule seems frivolous considering how often your classmates use their own during your studies," the Scarab said with annoyance, a loud chittering noise coming from beneath the boy's shirt. Izuku thought for a moment that the Scarab was about to do something that would get him in trouble, so he turned his head over his shoulder with an attempt to look down at his back. "Hey, no, behave yourself," he said out loud. "I was merely stating that the rules of this school seem exceedingly loose," 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 said with a hint of amusement as the boy's outburst only served to provoke the curiosity of the others, including the teacher, but only served to increase Bakugo's ire. "Is your quirk talking to you?" the teacher asked with a hint of awe in his voice. "I'd heard that your quirk was sentient, but I didn't think that it was to this extent." His tone turned to excitement. "I know that I just said that you're not allowed to use your quirk, but I'd love to see what this sentient quirk of yours can do." "Oh my, I do believe he is challenging you, Izuku Midoriya," 𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏 said with amusement heavy in his tone. "Why not let your friend see the armor that saved his life?" Izuku sighed. "I guess I should get this over with," he wondered, thinking it best that he just ripped it off like a band-aid to save himself the pain later. So he got up from his seat and stood in the middle of the aisle. "Please don't take over, all right?" As a former host of mine once said, the Scarab said, "It is all you, buddy." Izuku took a deep breath and willed the Scarab's armor over himself. It was as if the boy had transformed into a different being entirely when the blue and black armor encased him. "Well, would you look at that?" the teacher said as he marveled at the armored teen. Before his eyes widened, "Wait a minute, Midoriya. You were the one that rescued Bakugo from that sludge villain." The class was abuzz with chatter as they all recalled that their other classmate had been attacked a few days prior and had been saved by an armored hero, who now appeared to be a vigilante. "This isn't good. What harm could they do to you?" Kajita asked with hostility in his voice. "Regardless of whether I am defined as a quirk or a support item, you saved the life of that wretched creature, whereas the licensed heroes simply stood by, fearing for their own lives while he slowly asphyxiated." "Mr. Midoriya, I think you and I should visit the principal," the teacher said, making the boy's heart sink down to his stomach. While it was one thing for the students and the teachers to ignore the rules of quirk usage, it was an entirely different matter altogether for a student to conduct vigilantism. As Izuku's heart began to race at what this could mean for him, the door to the classroom slammed open. "That boy is going nowhere with you, sir." The newcomer snapped angrily, causing all eyes to land on him. He was tall, all of 7'2" with a lean build. His eyes were bright blue, and his hair was wavy, with 2 long strands coming down from his hairline and framing his face. It was actually the only way that Izuku recognized him with how different he looked. This was Toshinori Yagi, better known to the world as All Might, the #1 hero, restored. "Say nothing," Kajita cautioned him. "He kept his normal self a secret for good reason, and you must not reveal it to anyone." Izuku silently agreed with him, knowing that he would have blurted out the man's hero alias without a second thought had the Scarab's armor not locked his jaw in place to prevent it. "Apologies," the Scarab said a moment later. "I only meant to protect the pair of you when I took control of the armor. I would have asked your permission had this not been urgent." Behind the man both the teacher and Izuku saw was the principal himself, looking rather pleased. "He's quite right," the balding man said as he stepped around the large man. "Class, allow me to introduce a very special guest, Mr. Toshinori Yagi, the personal assistant to All Might at the Minato, Tokyo branch of Might Towers," he said grandly as the class erupted into excited chatter. The teacher looked at the man as he tipped his hat at the children before taking it off and tucking it under his arm. "Sir, I don't think I quite understand," he said. "While I know that Mr. Midoriya must have had Mr. Bakugo's best interest in mind, he still performed vigilantism, and the school has a very strict policy on such acts." Tashina looked at the man with a tight smile. "While that may be so in most cases, sir," he said with a friendly look in Izuku's direction. "However, in young Midoriya's case, All Might himself has taken a very special interest in him." The chatter started up again. "However, since the young man didn't hang around after the villain was contained, I had to do a little research to find him." "Find me," Izuku stuttered. "It is an act," the Scarab told him. "Why are you stuttering?" "Nerves," Izuku yelped mentally. Toshinori nodded. "Yes, indeed," he smiled. "You see, your quirk was not recognized in any of the registration offices, which gave me a pretty good idea that you were a late bloomer and would most likely register your quirk soon after." He gestured to the classroom, "And as I'm here, I'm obviously correct. Why the hell would All Might want anything to do with him?" Bakugo growled quietly, just barely keeping himself under control. However, Toshinori must have heard him, because not only did young Midoriya show great promise as a future hero, he smiled as smoke began rising from Bakugo's clenched fists. But the young man impressed him quite a bit. Not only did he minimize damage to the area, but he was also able to capture the villain exceedingly quickly. Izuku felt himself swelling with pride from the man's praise. However, the sound of tiny explosions popping off made him more nervous than seeing All Might at the door. And because All Might was so impressed with Mr. Midoriya's performance, the principal continued, "He has kindly offered to sponsor him when he graduates and enters high school." "But I don't understand, sir." The helmet covering his face and head opened up, showing his face. "I still made myself a vigilante, so..." Toshinori started chuckling. "Do you know how many heroes nowadays used to be vigilantes?" he asked, and Izuku almost answered him, but a buzz from the Scarab halted him. "There's quite a few of them," he said, addressing the class as a whole, and there are just as many more that were taken straight out of middle school, such as this one, and put into training. He smiled at the boy. And this, my boy, is exactly that. Izuku looked confused. He knew that All Might wanted to train him for the upcoming UA entrance exams, but didn't expect to be pulled from school. I've already spoke with your mother over the phone, Toshinori went on, and the principal here has kindly offered to write up all the necessary paperwork required for an early graduation. He smiled. In the meantime, I will be overseeing your training personally from this point on. Blue Beetle. The day ended on a sour note for one Katsuki Bakugo. Not only was he being constantly reminded of being attacked by a villain and rendered helpless, but he had found out that the one that he owed his life to was none other than the most annoying little shit that he knew, Izuku Midoriya. How the hell does that little bastard suddenly gain a quirk? He snarled to himself as he stalked toward home angrily, and then catch the attention of the fucking number one fucking hero. After the All Might's assistant had arrived and taken Izuku out of class, it had taken all that he had in the form of control to keep from letting his quirk run wild. Of all the fucking things to go wrong. The blonde snarled as he kicked a crumpled can down the street. I was supposed to be the only one from that shitty school to get into fucking UA. This was my origin story. He kicked the can again as he came up on it. Fucking Deku. He snapped. Fucking school. His hands started smoldering. Fucking stupid-ass quirk. He let loose a blast that was strong enough to lift him off the ground several feet. He'd better enjoy being All Might's golden boy as long as he can, 'cause when I get into UA, I'm gonna blow that worthless Deku to kingdom come. Blue Beetle. I can't believe how different you look now, Izuku said as he smiled at his favorite hero. I wasn't even sure that you would use the nanomachines that Kaji made for you. Toshinori chuckled as the two of them waited at a small hole-in-the-wall restaurant. After picking the young teen up from school, they had quickly called Inko to let her know where they were, and asked if she could meet them there. The woman quickly agreed, and promised to be there as quickly as she was able. Now the man found himself on the end of the boy's bombardment of questions. I must admit, young Midoriya, I was pleasantly surprised to find that your friend meant what he said. He said, not mentioning the torturous pain that he had had to endure. The previous night, when he had injected himself, he was glad to have David's support. If he hadn't been there, then there was a very good chance that he wouldn't have been able to pull through. His entire body had felt like it had been thrown into a wood chipper, puzzled back together, and then shoved through a meat grinder. Repeatedly. Though the Scarab had warned him that there would be pain, but he hadn't told him just how much. Luckily for the large man, he was accustomed to pain, and with his friend's help, was able to pull through it. Izuku laughed. I'm glad to know that you don't have to worry about time anymore, he said, but are you sure it's okay for me to get this sort of treatment? He asked, referring to being pulled out of school to be trained. I mean, I'm grateful but dash. Toshinori shook his head. I understand what you mean, my boy, he said. You'd like to earn your way into the school, right? The boy nodded slowly. Now, I understand why. But I have quite another reason for going this far in order to train you, young Midoriya. Izuku waited for him to explain as he felt Kajita stirring. I have a suspicion of why he pulled you from school. He said, I believe that he has likely guessed that you have suffered severe abuse at this educational center. Kaji says that you pulled me out because you thought I was being bullied. Izuku summed it up, making the man raise his brow. Was that right? Toshinori gave the boy a slow nod. I will admit that, from your behavior when you worried about being recognized, I had thought that you suffered from quirkless discrimination. He explained while shaking his head, things like that make me sick to my stomach. It wasn't that long ago that half the population was quirkless, yet within a few decades, quirk wielders were the norm, and quirkless were on the decline. He said while the boy looked teary-eyed, Now, no water works. Izuku rubbed at his eyes with his sleeve. Sorry, sir. I just didn't expect. Young Midoriya, the man said, I owe you a great debt. Not only did you prove me so terribly wrong about you becoming a hero, but you, by extension, also saved my life, my career, and gave me a chance to continue doing what I love. He smiled as the boy started tearing up again, and no amount of apologies or thank yous will ever be enough for me to convey just how much this means to me. He patted himself on the chest, but I hope that this will be a fine start. The Scarab seemed pleased by the man's sincerity. I did not give him the nanomachines in order to endear him to us, Kajita said, sounding humbled. I find myself growing fond of this human. Izuku snorted through his tears, rubbing one eye with the back of his hand. Kaji says he likes you. Toshinori sputtered out a laugh at that, still unaccustomed to not coughing up blood. Well, given the circumstances, I've grown quite fond of him as well. He chuckled, but the bullying was not the only reason I wanted to pull you from school. He said with a hardened edge entering his voice, Are you familiar with the Meta Liberation Army? Izuku nodded. I've heard of them, he muttered as realization set in, and some of the teachers actually preached some of their views on quirk usage. Exactly. Toshinori leaned in close. While they weren't open about it, many of the teachers at Aldra were followers of 𝗬𝗪 before he was defeated. He went on heatedly. I wanted to have you pulled out of there before they started forcing some of their more extreme ideals on you, since you have a fairly powerful quirk, so to speak. He said, and soon I plan to have them thoroughly investigated by a very close friend of mine on the police force. You really think it's that bad? Izuku muttered. You don't. Toshinori countered. Young Midoriya, you've attended this school for nearly 3 years. You should know what they're like concerning those with powerful quirks. The boy nodded. I do, but the teachers were never abusive, he muttered. At least, not outright. Toshinori leaned back and laced his fingers together. Young Midoriya, I realize that you are a kind young man, but there are some people that simply don't deserve that kindness. He said with a saddened look on his face. These men and women at your school may be teachers, but there are lines that have been crossed when they shouldn't have. I know, but how many quirkless children aside from yourself attended Aldra? He asked. If there were others, did they, by chance, always seem to get in trouble which involved another student with a particularly strong quirk? Yes, there was at least one more student. Izuku nodded sadly, and well, do not attempt to reveal this if it causes you unrest, the Scarab said. I recall that this young woman was forced to leave the school after the incident. Toshinori, however, had already guessed what had happened. At least tell me she wasn't injured. Izuku shook his head. Not injured. The man's knuckles turned white as he clenched his hands together tightly. I see. He rumbled deeply. Tell me, do you still think these people are worth wasting your kindness on? Izuku was quiet for a long time, not trusting himself to answer. The man gave a small sigh. Given time, you'll learn that sometimes kindness is wasted on some. He gave the boy a smile. But that will be far into the future, I hope. In the meantime, once you've graduated, we'll begin your training in full. What will I be doing? Izuku asked. Toshinori smiled at him. Since your muscle structure is sound thanks to your friend, I think combat will be the order for the next several months. He said, leaning forward. If your friend is as old as you think he is, then I believe he might be able to teach you a few things. Izuku felt amusement from the back of his neck. I believe that is a challenge, is it not? The boy chuckled at the Scarab's tone, but was saved from answering the man as his mother abruptly arrived at their table. Izuku, the woman shouted before latching onto the boy. You'll never guess what I heard from Mr. Yagi. Toshinori coughed, gaining her attention. Nice to see you again, Ms. Midoriya. Inko's face turned blank for a moment, right before her jaw absolutely dropped. And Mr. Yagi? The entire meeting devolved into Inko demanding an explanation about the man's renewed appearance, and what her son would be doing over the next several months to prepare him for UA's entrance exams.